Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z, and tonight we are talking about deals, spells, favors, bargaining with fate, and so much more. But before we dive into that, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Lynn.
Hi, I'm Dr. Lynn Zubernis. I'm a clinical psychologist and a professor at Westchester University, and a lot of my research is on fandom. I've written lots and lots of books on Supernatural. My favorite show in the history of ever will never be replaced. The most recent two books that I wrote were written with the Supernatural actors, who all wrote chapters about what the show has meant to them and what they hope its legacy will be. And those are Family Don't End with Blood and There'll Be Peace When You Are Done.
Okay, Travis.
Hi, my name is Travis Adams. I am a social worker with the VA. I specialize in working with veterans of PTSD and using pop culture to help them along their recovery.
And I'm Gail Z. Martin and Morgan Brace. As Gail, I write epic and urban fantasy. As Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. But all my modern worlds are ones Sam and Dean could walk into and feel right at home. I'm a huge Supernatural fan. I was lucky enough to write a chapter in There'll Be Peace When You Are Done. And yeah, I fell down the rabbit hole and just haven't hit bottom yet and hope I never do. So here we go. So throughout the show, the boys and everybody around them are making deals and bargains. And sometimes they know going in that it's going to be a bad bargain. And sometimes they try to tell themselves it'll all be okay. So let's talk about this whole idea of bargaining with fate, because it really runs through all 15 seasons of Supernatural. Lynn?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of the basis of the entire show from the pilot on down. We don't know when we're watching the pilot, but what is happening in the pilot episode is that Mary made a deal with the yellow-eyed demon. So it's that deal with the devil that actually kicks off all of the events of Supernatural, that ends up with her burning on the ceiling and John losing his partner and the boys losing their mother, and that sends John on his quest for revenge and changes Sam and Dean's lives from maybe, in a nice little suburban house in Lawrence, Kansas, sort of a normal childhood, to anything but, which, yeah, from moment one, this is an important theme in the show.
Travis?
Yeah, I think it's important that we acknowledge, like, the first two deals are the parents, right? So that's where the boys kind of learn this thing from. Like you got, like Lynn said, with Mary, and then at the beginning of season 2, you get John for his soul, for Dean to stay alive, and they're willing to sacrifice. I think there's a really good quote from Dean from season 3. It's like, don't you see a pattern here? Dad's deal, my deal, now this. I mean, every time one of us is up the creek, the other one is begging to sell their soul. That they want to sacrifice themselves for their core value of family.
Yeah. And it's not like they really think this is going to turn out okay. I mean, this comes back to the lies we tell ourselves. Dean tells himself Sam will be fine when he's dead, that Sam will just go back to California and go back to school and get his, apple pie life and his picket fence, and he'll just go on. When the evidence is very much at the end of his nose that Sam is not going to be fine. This is not going to go okay. John at least had some security that Dean would look after Sam, maybe even better than John thought he might, be able to do himself. So I'll give John a pass on that as a parent. Okay, there's not much you wouldn't do for your kids. But Dean definitely was in a whole lot of denial about the impact of his deal. And then, round and round it goes, with Sammy making sort of his own sort of deal with Ruby, even though it's not termed that way. It's very much what it is he's really made a deal of his own to try to if not bring Dean back, then avenge him. So what other devil's bargains, so to speak, happen in the show? Because, you know, once Crowley comes online, we have a whole bunch of devil's bargains pretty much every week.
I mean, even
Thank
how
you.
I was saying, even how Crowley became Crowley, right? He did a deal just to be able to do that. So I think that like it does set up the tone for who he is and what he wants and what he's willing to sacrifice to, and where his loyalties lie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting things about Supernatural, as I was thinking about this sort of just as a general topic, is that it really drives the show. I mean, there's hardly an episode that doesn't involve some kind of deal or some kind of bargain, either the consequences of a deal that was made previously or new deals. But there's two different kinds of deals that are made in Supernatural. We do see a lot of, with the characters who are not Sam and Dean, deals and bargains made for selfish reasons, like people willing to trade something to get something for themselves, which, you know, is so realistic. You can't escape thinking about the parallels of that with what we've seen politicians do and celebrities do. Like, people trade, and just ordinary people, we trade off all kinds of things for kind of selfish bargains. When it comes to all of the Winchesters, almost every time they're making a deal, it's not, you know, for fame and fortune or anything for themselves. It's always to desperately try to bring back or to save a family member. So I never really thought about it before, but there's an interesting contrast there, and sort of the question of, when people make these kind of bargains, are they always really at the core selfish? You know, like you're talking about Dean making the deal to bring back Sam, and it's an ongoing question in those early seasons. Did Dean do that for Sam, or did Dean do that for Dean? It's like the Buffy question, you know, when Buffy was happy in heaven, was it a great idea to bring her back? Was that for Buffy? Was that for Sam? But I think the Winchesters, in their hearts, they feel like they are always doing it for the family member.
Yeah, I mean, the first time we see Dean really deal with a deal, aside from like his mom and dad, is he thinks that like a nerdy guy had sold his soul to get a very attractive wife. And it turns out he actually sold his soul to cure his wife's cancer.
Yeah.
So what does he do? He sacrifices, he puts himself in the demon's way and traps them in order to get him, or to get like the guy's soul free, right? Makes that deal. So, hey, you let this go and I'll remove the devil's trap and not kill you. And he follows through, and that is just the consistent tone that we have with the brothers, right? Like the acts of selfless service. They always want to help and are willing to die for the other one. They want to die for the innocents, because this is just like the life. But then you have like what Lynn was talking about, is like, well, is it like intrinsic reward system? Do I feel better being willing to die so that you can live? But does that make me feel better about myself?
And that, I mean, it's really, sometimes I am just like blown away by this show's consistency. Not that it's always consistent. There certainly were many episodes that you're just like, what is that? That doesn't line up with canon at all. But a lot of the main themes do really stay consistent. And Dean's belief that Sam will be okay without him there and will be able to live a life and have a family and find some kind of happiness, he never really loses that. I mean, in the finale episode, Dean is dying. He didn't sacrifice himself, but he knows he's dying. And he does believe that Sam will be able to go on and live a life. And Sam, for Dean, partially does go on to do that. So even though sometimes it seems like kind of a fantasy or a fiction that Dean tells himself, I think there's a part of him that needs to believe it and continues to believe it throughout the entire 15 years.
Well, you know, it's not that implausible if you think about, you know, if a parent sees that their kid is about to be hit by a car and runs out and shoves their child out of the way of the car. And so they get hit by the car. The parent gets hit by the car and dies. They're not thinking, oh, this is going to leave my child without a mother. My child will probably be scarred. They'll be in therapy the rest of their lives. This is going to ruin their life. No, it's like, I don't mind if I die, he'll live. And that's kind of the way I've seen the dynamic between Sam and Dean, is the, I don't want to be here if you're not, sense that you have with the people that you love the most, or the willingness to take me instead. I'll jump in front of the car and you can go on. So that's such a deep rooted piece of loving somebody. Is it right for the parent to do that? I mean, what parent would stand by and let their kid get run over? On the other hand, you know that kid's going to have a whole lot of trauma. So it's a messy question, compared to like Crowley selling his soul for a little enhancement.
Yeah.
So a lot of these choices, we have two other different things going on. There's a lot of bargaining with fate, the whole idea of fate and destiny and what turns out to be Chuck's, puppeting. So the idea of bargaining with fate. But then there's also a lot of these are Hobson's choices. There is no good choice. There is, aside from devil deals, many of the choices the boys are confronted with, there's bad and worse. There's worse and awful. How do you make that kind of choice? And how did they do in making those sort of world-shattering choices that shouldn't really rest on anybody's shoulders?
I mean, I think they blundered a lot of the time. I've said this before, but I like that Supernatural is somewhat realistic in that it lets the boys fail and it lets them make decisions that turn out to be bad decisions and have sort of cosmically horrible consequences. Sam, his bargain with Ruby has terrible, terrible consequences. He's sort of making the decision to do it, I think, with partially his heart in the right place and partially because he is not thinking clearly because of his grief. But it seems to him that he is trying to do the right thing, and it turns out to be absolutely the wrong thing. Dean, when he decides to eventually say yes to Michael in the later seasons, that's a terrible choice. It's the only way at the moment to save Sam, and he's hoping maybe Michael will somehow keep his word and this will turn out to be a good thing. And there's a painful about 15 seconds where Sam and Dean and Jack all think that they've killed Lucifer, and this is, there's this wonderful moment of joy, and then it all collapses as they realize, oh, no, this is not actually a bargain that's going to go well. But of course it wasn't. I do think that was sort of an impossible choice. And I like that the consequences are things that Sam and Dean have to struggle with again and again.
Yeah, I mean, even if we think about like season 4 with breaking the last seal, making a choice to kill them or not, breaking the last seal and then letting Lucifer out. And then in season 5, how he's like, okay, you can have me, but you got to let these people go. Again, always doing that selfless service, saying like, hey, I will sacrifice myself for the betterment of everybody around me. And yeah, I do love the fact that it's consistent with especially with them about what are we willing to do. We're always willing to make a deal, but then also a lot of times they like welch on the deal, and or like, okay, yeah, we'll do that, but we're gonna do it in like a month. So just have fun, Crowley, because you're gonna sit here on this devil trap.
Mm-hmm.
And they would do stuff like that, but they would still follow through eventually, for the most part.
On season 9, when Dean makes his deal with Gadriel and then tricks Sam into letting Gadriel in, I don't think Dean recognizes what that really meant until he's later possessed by Michael and goes, oh, that's what possession is. Yeah, I can see I screwed up. But in the moment, once again, he's just desperate not to lose Sam. And, it's kind of the dilemma that people have in real life when they've got a loved one who's not able to make a decision for themselves, and they're the power of attorney for healthcare. Do you, is it a do not respond? Do you withhold medication? Is this the end of life? Or, and then you guess what the other person would really want if they had all their faculties. So what about the Gadriel situation?
I struggle with that because I know, I mean, yes, it's horrible, horrible trauma being possessed. And it turned out to be even worse than anybody could have anticipated with who Gadriel ended up killing, because who he was working with. Dean didn't know. I mean, Dean did a little reconnaissance, thought that this was an angel that he more or less could trust. But I really feel for Dean in that moment. Like, if your loved one is imminently about to die, and you have somebody standing here saying, well, this is a little risky, but we think this will save him. Really? Was he just supposed to say, no, I don't think we'll try that. We'll try nothing and he will die. I can't see most of us making that kind of a decision, let alone Dean Winchester, about his brother, the closest person in the world to him. So I know Dean takes there's a lot of Dean hatred or Dean anger about his decision to make that deal with Gadriel. But I never really understood the level of that anger, because I just think there was practically no other choice. Which of us would be able to stand there and say, well, I'll let my kid die because, this treatment has some risk to it. So, I won't try it. Who's going to do that?
Or anybody who's ever dealt with a parent in that position where, okay, here's a treatment, we can save them. There might be a loss of function. They might not be able to do X, Y, Z, but they'll be alive. And you can't ask them, or maybe they weren't in a mental capacity to ask them. That really does have, aside from devils and demons and all of that, there are real life situations people get put in like that. Travis?
Well, say, like, even with what you were talking about earlier, Gail, with the mom or the parent pushing the kid out of the way, you're not thinking about any consequence that could happen. You're thinking about right here, right now, I have this choice. And that's what Dean did with kind of getting him to admit to Gadriel, or getting Sam to admit to Gadriel and helping him. I think that's part of his, he does like to think of the here and now. Dean is very much, what can I do right now to do something? I need to do something. I need to punch something. I need to do something. And that's how he reacts to a lot of things. He's a very smart man, but a lot of impulsivity.
And he also gets put in just ridiculous situations where some kind of imminent action is, it's life or death situation, and you have 20 seconds if you're lucky to make up your mind. I mean, he gets put in those situations way more than most of us in real life, and kind of just, Sam was about to go. He was about to be gone in that moment. So.
And I'm guessing, Travis, that now you come from a military background, that's certainly not an unheard of situation under fire where you might not have perfect information. You only know what you know. You only see what you see. Somebody's got to do something. And what are you going to do?
When I was in the Marine Corps, I deployed a couple times to Iraq, and then doing this job, I get to talk to a lot of veterans and active duty service members that are put in those situations and pull the trigger or throw the grenade or shoot down something or destroy that building. And then they find out how many innocents are in there, or how many people got hurt that necessarily weren't supposed to be there. And then that guilt that comes from it, that resentment that they have from the higher ups. Like, you told me to do this, and now I have this blood on my hands. So they carry that too. There's a lot of moral injury that happens a lot of times too, from depending on who gets injured, where a person, service member in our case, goes, or in Dean's case, a hunter, and Sam, goes against their kind of moral values in order for that moment because that moment is all that matters, and then it changes the direction of their life for years. And it doesn't always show up right away. You know, moral injury can show up years later and it's just sitting in the back, just kind of ruminating.
Travis, that is such a good point, and it reminds me that that's another way in which Supernatural doesn't gloss over these things. You know, after the Ruby debacle, Sam feels incredibly guilty, and we see other characters sort of intensify that guilt for him and say, "Oh, you're the one, you know, who let Lucifer free," and he owns all of that without ever protesting, without ever saying, "Well, but what I thought I was doing," he just takes it because of the guilt. After Gadriel, when Dean really realizes what it did to Sam, he feels incredibly guilty and questions himself again and again. Did I do the wrong thing? Was it just selfish what I did? Should I have let him go? So we see them pay a price for every time they make these decisions, especially when, as you say, there's some kind of moral injury attached to it.
Yeah, and you know, early when Dean's first deal with his soul, and you know, it being a year to save Sam after he's stabbed in the back, Bobby goes up to him and says, "What did you do? What do you think your brother's gonna feel when he finds out that you did this?" Right? And he's like, "I had to. He's my brother. I have to protect him. I have to save him. That's my job." And he continues that consistently.
Yeah. And then Sam's perfect retort, "Well, what do you think my job is? Like, I want to do the same for you." What a conundrum that is. I want to save you. No, I want to save you. That's kind of Supernatural.
Yeah, I was doing a group recently, and one of the members said, you know, people in our lives, it's a veteran group, people in our lives want to help us, and we don't want to be a burden to them. So what can we do? And it comes down to, like, if they want to help us, let them help us, because by blocking that, we're actually hurting them also, because they want to be helpers. So we got to let them be helpers sometimes. And I thought that was really insightful to put into the different perspective. Like, if I'm going to die for you, let me die for you. Don't try to bring me back. And that's the deal they make. And then they go against it every single time.
Yeah. Except in the finale, Sam let Dean go. Dean asked him to. He said he was okay with it. He told Sam what he wanted, and Sam kept his word in that final episode.
Which was really hard after the whole purgatory kerfluffle, when they had already agreed to let each other go, and then Sam didn't, and that wasn't right either. And assuming it wasn't a hallucination, I'm still not convinced. But so this time, at least in the finale, Dean was very, very clear that he meant it. No deals, no bringing me back. To get Sam off the hook. Sorry, didn't mean that pun. For the guilt of not bringing him back. But, you know, speaking of that, the Mark of Cain was a type of bargain. If you think about it, there was definitely a trade made there for the strength and the speed and the immortality versus, oh yeah, you become a knight of hell. So what about Cain and Dean in that case?
Talk about backfiring.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately Dean ended up a demon, the last thing in the world that he would ever want to be. So that one didn't go down so well. I feel like Dean's decision to do that was so heavily influenced too by the things that came before, and by the guilt that he was still carrying around, and the dark place that he was in. There was a desperation to that agreement that I don't, if somebody was thinking more clearly, I don't, it never seemed super compelling to me that he needed to do that to defeat Abaddon, who never really came off as such a big bad that it required that level of bargain. So I always sort of put that decision down to Dean's psychological mindset at the time that he would do something like that. And I guess talking about consequences again, when we make decisions, when we're in a place where we're not thinking really clearly, and we are in a really, really dark place, we often make decisions that are really bad for us, whether it's addiction or violence, aggression, a suicide attempt, whatever it is, we make impulsive decisions that if somebody had been able to stand back and really think clearly, they would have said, consequences of this are probably not going to be worth it. I thought the whole Mark of Cain had a really compelling sort of addiction parallel. And I'm curious, Travis, you have much more expertise in this than I do. Did you kind of see it that way?
Yeah, like anger can be addicting. It very much is for a lot of people. And having that power, having that ability, and then being fueled by the mark and being fueled by the knife, kind of just became intoxicating to him. And you can see him kind of enjoying it and being torn enjoying it, right? Similar to when he's torturing in hell. He admits that he did start to enjoy it. That's a part of who he is because of the things he's seen and done. So I do think that that's definitely like an addiction that he tends to chaos, like rampage, right? Rage really comes through, and rage is that anger and aggression that is so addicting. Another thing you had said, Lynn, was we do decisions based on what's going on in this moment, and then we judge ourselves later. And we use that hindsight bias, right? This pattern of thinking that really messes us up because like, oh, I should have done this and not this, right? We Monday morning quarterback. We forget the fact that we didn't have all the information that we have today then in that moment. And to practice some self-compassion, which is something that a lot of us who have been in similar situations that made choices and decisions that impact the direction of our lives don't believe we're entitled to.
Yeah, I do feel like that's something in which the Winchesters, I've talked about this before, that I appreciate that the characters were allowed to evolve. And I feel like one of the ways in which they evolved is that they did come to have more compassion for themselves, to be like, well, some of the decisions that we made really didn't go down too well, but for the most part, we really were trying to do the right thing. We really were trying to do the saving people part of the hunting things. And, we had this truck out there all this time, making it harder and pulling strings. And yet we really kept trying.
Yeah. And, there's so many different ways you can see the metaphor for the devil's bargains and the crossroads deals in real life. Because one of the things that occurs to me is people who are really in a position where they need money, they don't have money, they go to a loan shark, or they make a bad, they take out a loan with really bad consequences. And now they're indebted. Now somebody's got something on them. Now they get pulled into things they never would have done, except that in that moment of desperation, they made a bad decision out of the bad options that were available to them. And maybe that was the best they could do at the time. But so many times Sam and Dean kind of get pulled into that, mafia metaphor of, okay, you've made this deal, now you owe me, now you have to go do this, and you don't want to, but we have a deal and I'll get you if you don't. So that is an entanglement that goes with the deals as well, is that loss of autonomy.
Yeah, you see that in the season when the boys were reluctantly working with Crowley, and they felt like they had to at the time, but they realized increasingly, like, this is not a good trade-off. Like, this is not working. We thought that we could make a bargain and it would turn out to be something ultimately to benefit us, but we're paying too high a price. Even if that price that we're paying is just knowing that we're dealing with the devil and knowing that we've lost our free will and we're doing his bidding. That became kind of intolerable to them. Again, like you said, Gail, going back to that ongoing theme of free will and choice that kind of runs through the whole series and becomes a gigantic theme in the end when we realize that what Chuck is doing.
Well, and, speaking of bad deals, there's Mary and the British Men of Letters. Anybody want to weigh in on that one?
I think she is willing to do something like that and join them because she wants to kind of find her own self, right? She doesn't have a sense of self. She's been gone for so long. So she joins this group, and then she gets to do all the things of her anger, of her rage, of letting stuff out, of missing all this time with her boys, and then feeling disconnected from her sons through her own fault, like not responding to text messages and different things like that. So I think that's how she finds meaning, and she uses it as a sense of avoidance. So very similar to what Lynn was saying earlier, you know, the drinking, the addictions, extreme sports, sex, gambling, all these things become an addiction, anger, to help us avoid the stuff that's going on internally. And I think she kind of
Well, a lot of times people in helping professions also get pulled into, I need to work 24/7 because I'm helping people. Yeah, I'm not seeing my spouse or my kids, but I'm helping people. And that can become kind of a way to deal with whatever isn't right as well, or avoid it.
Yeah, I that whole storyline was not my favorite and was not entirely believable to me. I mean, I think we were meant to believe that Mary thought that the men of letters could possibly wipe out all monsters, and that that would save her sons from having to be hunters, because she very much didn't want them to be hunters. Um, that never made any sense to me at all. They never really seemed like that powerful an organization that had any prayer of wiping out every single monster. And Mary Winchester is supposed to be smart. And so that was really hard to buy. I mean, I can hand wave it with all the things that Travis just said and all the reasons why probably if you're yanked out of heaven and your 5-year-old and 2-year-old are now grown men and have been hunting for decades, that would mess you up pretty badly. So maybe you're going to grasp at straws and believe something that's implausible, but it really strained credibility as far as my believing it. It never really seemed like a believable bargain that Mary Winchester would make.
Yeah. Now, one of the other, well, Rowena certainly made a number of bargains along the way to get where she was. Anything stand out to you on that? Because we see as we get to know her that she had apparently been willing to trade her self-esteem to work with the Laughlins back when she was Raggedy Ann, when she was homeless and destitute. And you get hints along the way that she was willing to deal with humiliation and mistreatment just to acquire the power she needed to finally be able to splatter everybody that had it coming. But that's certainly a definite kind of deal there as well, or a deal making.
Yeah, no, I love the character of Rowena because I think it really is such a complex character, and we get enough backstory that, you know, she's one of the few sort of villains and becomes a frenemy that we get enough backstory on that we really start to understand her. And I think her whole history is a great example of how, when you really have not had any power and you've had a great deal of disenfranchisement and mistreatment, and you feel like you have absolutely no recourse and no way to really survive and thrive, you're willing to make all kinds of bargains to claw your way up out of that. And I think that's just human nature. You know, she was in a position where she was taken advantage of and she had nothing at all. Her only recourse to claw her way up was to make some bargains, and a lot of them were really difficult and they required a lot of personal sacrifice for her, and a lot of them were really ruthless to the people around her. And as she started to acquire that power, she was willing to step on a lot of other people, including her own son, in order to get what she wanted. And it's really not pretty, but it is a dynamic that you see happen, that people will become so desperate. If that's the only way they think they can claw their way out of something, they will step on 23 people to get the leverage to finally move up and crawl their way out. And I think That's a lot of what happened to Rowena. You do see her evolution as time goes on. Once she has been in that position of power, I think a lot of people finally crawl out and get to that position of power and continue to just step on people because they've become detached from any empathy that they had. But Rowena actually is able to eventually tap back into her humanity and her capacity for empathy, thanks to Sam and Dean largely. And so she doesn't stay stuck in that narcissism that came out of all those early experiences.
Yeah, I think that, the progression we get with her is so huge, from killing like a random waiter at the beginning to when she's, the queen of hell. She stops the crossroad deals, right? Like she's like, hey, no more. Let's let people end up where they need to end up. So that it's a tremendous growth. And again, you get to see this over how many seasons, to watch her change and shift little by little too, because people can change and shift. And that's why I think this show works so well in working and talking about it with therapy and mental health, because there's so many things that little shifts over time become huge shifts.
Yeah, her final sort of bargain, if you will, her final sacrifice is so very Winchester when she tells Sam, "You have permission to kill me. It's what you need to do. I willingly sacrifice myself." I mean, there's nothing more Winchester than that. So it really shows her evolution as a character. Also made me really cry.
Every time. One of the other people who made a lot of deals along the way was Cass. He made them with heaven. He made them with hell. He made them with Crowley. He made them with Metatron. He he ultimately made them with the empty. I thought that was an interesting thing, because many of the deals with heaven were no cleaner than the deals with hell. In fact, the deals with hell generally had fewer gotchas in them than the heaven deals seem to. And that always intrigued me, because at least you knew what you were dealing with when you were dealing with hell. Heaven presented itself as something that it wasn't, so there was sort of a double whammy there. But what about all those deals? And then, of course, as they're dealing with Crowley is trying to do a deal with Dick Roman. So everybody's dealing with everybody. Let's make a deal. But what about Cass's deals?
In the supernatural psychology book that I contribute to, we have to pick a road song to go with our little sidebar. And mine was the Rolling Stones, like every cop is a criminal and every sinner is a saint, because of the duality, especially between hell and heaven, and how hell, although it's considered to be the worst part, they're honest. They're like, hey, this is what it is. Take it or leave it. And heaven is always playing games, it seems like. A lot of the angels play games to kind of manipulate to get their way. And that's kind of how I viewed it, the majority of the series. Cass is genuine. Cass wants to help, but even he turns his back on the boys and hides things from him, and then they find out because he makes a little slip. But he has the intentions to help everybody, and it just doesn't work out. And he tries to grow, he tries to change, but he's still pretty naive in a lot of areas too.
Yeah, I feel like his naivete got in the way of him making good decisions for a long time. His early decisions were not well informed, not well thought out. I mean, there's real life parallels there too, right? When we don't really think about, why am I believing that I should do what this person or this organization or this administration or this authority figure says that I should do? If you don't question it and you make decisions and you make deals just based on that unquestioning, oh yes, I'll go along with you, a lot of them are pretty bad decisions that have pretty bad consequences. So in a way, his early decisions were really selfish in that he didn't really think about the impact that they would have on others, letting Sam out of the panic room or breaking the wall in Sam's head. There was no sort of concern for what is this going to do to this good human. It was just, well, this is what I'm supposed to do, and I'm a good soldier, and and I'm going to do that. So a lot of his early decisions were just terrible, had terrible ramifications. But I think he also evolved in kind of that same sort of exploration of free will and choice, and you don't just do what somebody tells you because maybe that's not in the best interest of anyone. And he started to try to make decisions that he had given some moral consideration to. And, you know, similar to Rowena, different pathway, but similar to Rowena, in the end, he does make a sacrifice of his life to the empty to try to save the good people, to try to do that. So I think he also evolves in learning to make deals that are not just selfish and that are not just ill considered, but that are really, at least in the person or the angel's belief, going to benefit other people.
You know, in boot camp, we had to say, like, discipline is instant obedience to orders. You're told to do something, you just do it. You don't think about it, you just do it. Because if you take time to think, you're going to get killed, or somebody else could get killed. So just act. And we see that, I mean, even in the new Maverick movie, he says, don't think, just act. Just do it. You have to make that decision because there's a time and a place. Castiel was like that because he was a soldier. And slowly, as he's like spending more time on Earth, spending more time with the boys, getting to know humanity more, he starts to grow and sees like it's more than war, it's more than conflict, it's connection, it's love. Right? When he becomes a hippie in the future, he's all about love.
Yeah. Well, even his deal with the empty, it goes back to that metaphor about shoving your child out of the way of the speeding car. He did it for Jack, and he considered himself Jack's father. And so he was given a bum deal, but hey, take this deal and your kid will live. Well, you know, what are you going to do? He couldn't overpower the empty. He had to, it was a take it or leave it deal with Jack in the balance. And ultimately he paid a price for it, but it enabled Jack to be the new god, which presumably worked out way better than having him trapped in the empty. So yeah, that's another one of those messy decisions that all of these bargains and choices come down to, is just they're messy. Which is
like
again,
just like in real life.
Yeah. What did I forget to bring up? What bargains did you have on your list that we haven't talked about?
The one that I love, and not necessarily the bargain itself, although it's good because Crowley hooks up Bobby, but the fact that the ceiling with the kiss and then him having the picture to show off, and him like Mark Shepard still having it on his phone is just great to me.
Why'd you have to use tongue? Yeah.
The other two that I was thinking about, which are sort of similar, are deals with death. I mean, the Winchesters will, you know, they'll go as high as they have to, you know, making a deal with death. I was thinking of Red Meat and the unbelievable lengths that Dean went to, actually taking his own life in order to get to death, to, he thought, bring Sam back. Of course, Sam wasn't even dead, and he did that, you know, again with death himself, becoming a Reaper, again, killing himself, dying himself in order to have an audience with death. So, you know, when you talk about making deals and bargains, you can't say that the Winchesters weren't willing to go all the way and go all the way to the top, to either death or God or whoever, to make the bargains that they thought would save somebody that they really cared about.
Yeah, and I actually thought about that one, especially when we're talking about the Four Horsemen, and Death's willing to give his ring, but Dean has to put it on to be Death for 24 hours. And Dean doesn't care about sacrificing himself. He'll sacrifice himself all day long, but he won't let a single innocent person die. And by doing that, the dominoes fall differently, and then many other people die.
Yeah.
So just like sometimes like things happen and it's out of our control, and it's what has to happen or does happen because we can't change it. It helps people find acceptance, I think. Like I can't do anything to go into the past. I can't change that, but I can change how I feel about it moving forward.
Yeah, and Dean and Sam find that peace in later seasons where Dean says, I'm okay with who I am. I'm okay with who you are. Or to Sam when he tries to apologize yet again, I've let it go. It's okay. We're good. That's a huge growth step for Dean because both of the boys could just be hung up in an interminable loop of coulda, woulda, shoulda. If only I'd known, how could I be so stupid? On a cosmic level, most of us stay up at night sometimes for that kind of thing, but Winchester level guilt, is another whole thing.
Yeah. At the end of fanfic, when they're about to walk off and they watch the BM scene with the brothers, and like Dean's reaction to it, he just tells Sam to stop and just listen. Like that is so huge to me, and it always resonates with me. I mean, it's one of my favorite episodes for multiple reasons, but I think that is a huge part of their relationship. And he finds acceptance. He finds like, hey, we were mad at each other, but we can still work together. We can still be together. We're still brothers. Because I think going back with all these deals, with all these kind of exceptions to like, hey, I'm going to die, I'm going to live, working for each other. A lot of times it comes down to their values, right? Hunting people, saving people, hunting things. And we want to save people. And if that's a risk and I have to die for it, so be it.
Lynn, other thoughts?
No, I think Travis just summed it up really well, and you with the evolution of the boys. But I don't think I ever thought about before doing this panel how much the idea of deals and bargains really did shape the show. And interestingly, how you can trace it through the show and see the evolution of the characters, which is pretty beautiful.
Yeah. Well, we have blown through our time as we always do. And thank you so much. Before we go, please tell everybody where they can find you online. Travis?
I don't really have an online presence right now, just some other things, but I do contribute to the series of books, the Psych Geeks books with Dr. Travis Langley. I'm hoping to do a few more projects coming up soon. That's kind of where I'm at right now.
Okay. And Lynn?
You can find me on pretty much all social media at FangasmSPN. And if you're interested in the books that the Supernatural actors wrote, the website is peacewhenyouaredone.com.
I'm pretty easy to find at gailzmartin.com, morganbryce.com. I'm on all the social media sites under those names. So if you spell them right, you'll find me. I am a staff columnist for the Winchester Family Business Blog, and I run the Supernatural TFWNC Facebook group here on Facebook. But mostly you can find me here on Continual. So thank you so much for another wonderful panel. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There'll be more Supernatural coming up soon. So we'll see you online.